you had to be very sensitive to that power. You couldn't put on lots of power for takeoff. The thing is, a Spitfire was a racing machine.
Hoje a Sala de Guerra traz para você um presente, uma entrevista com o último dos voluntários argentinos que partiu para a Segunda Guerra Mundial para lutar ao lado das forças britânicas. Ronnie Scott, hoje aos 105 anos de idade, é o último piloto de Spitfire vivendo aqui na América Latina e também provavelmente a última pessoa aqui da região a ter presenciado as bombas voadoras V1 atacando Londres. Essa entrevista somente foi possível com a ajuda do meu amigo Roman Santini, de São Paulo, e da sua filha Flávia Santini, de Buenos Aires. Então eu já deixo aqui os meus agradecimentos e desejo a você uma boa diversão. So, Ronnie, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for allowing us to get a few hours from your day and to tell us this amazing story of your life.
Well, my father was a good sportsman, especially fisherman. He was good at as a yachtsman, and he also was a very good rugby referee. The Argentine Rugby Union gave him a silver whistle for 1921, 22-24 for being the referee of the big matches. But he passed away when I was 10 years old. So after that, it was a difficult time for the family. And eventually we succeeded. I had an uncle who was in World War I and a manager in the railway, and an uncle who was a bank manager for British banks. So I had good schooling. When the war came along in 1942, I lived with my mother because she had a combination of bronchitis that was not good. So she had to go to hospital. That was in May. The following day, I went to the British Embassy and put my name down as a volunteer, went to the hospital, did my exams. I was in good physical shape. I played first division rugby, cricket, hockey, and I was always doing sport.
I understand that your father was a Scotsman and your mother was an English woman.
Yes,
how did they came to Argentina?
He went to the Boer War. That was 1898 in South Africa with some Australian friends. And my mother came out as a girl went to Rosario, up country from Buenos Aires, and her mother died from a fever, so she had to go out to work. So she went as a nurse to the British hospital in Buenos Aires.
So this is how they met. And you were born in 1917, right?
Correct. 20th of October.
1917. And Ronnie, which was like your childhood in Argentina? Were you raised as a British boy or more like an Argentinian boy?
No, I floated around the British community. I went to British schools. I went to British churches. I was baptized Anglo in the Anglo Church, and I spoke English long before much better than Spanish, until I started going to Spanish school.
And there was a big British community, especially in Buenos Aires, right?
Around about 1940, the community must have been about 60,000.
60,000 people. It's a lot of people, yes. When were you growing up? You had quite a lot of experiences being a part of the British community. Can you point some of these experiences that were special to you?
My mother was keen on flowers, so the English group had a garden community, and they had about 14 branches in the different areas, and they used to have a lot of interest in that. And then there was always British sport. I normally went every weekend to see.
I realized that you had in 1931 a pretty interesting encounter with then the Prince of Wales, Edward, which after that became Edward the Eighth of England.
That
What
is
was that like?
well, I was watching a game of polo at the Hurlingham Club, which is a very nice club. I was a junior member there, and he galloped up to me, up to the fence, and he said, "Would you please get me a tonic water?" Estaba muy sudado.
He was playing polo.
He was playing polo. So I went to the bar to get him a tonic water. I added lemon juice, went back to the fence. He came back at a gallop to get his tonic water. Muy agradecido, muy simpático. Y también llegó su secretario civil. Y entonces hablaron del portador, el Eagle,
The carrier.
the carrier. That was the first carrier in Buenos Aires, and they had come. He and George, his brother, had come because they had to introduce a very interesting exhibition. They came, the Prince of Wales came to introduce the exhibition, which lasted 2 or 3 weeks. And they always had a Scottish clan who played music there very well. So the feeling of the English presence was very definite in those days.
Yes.
Estaba muy acertado.
And the Prince of Wales invited you to see the HMS
Well,
Eagle aircraft carrier.
He talked to his secretary, and his secretary arranged that I be picked up the following day and go on the Eagle. So I was about 12 years old, so the memory stayed with me. And in May 1942, when I go to the embassy, I say, I would like to be a pilot in the British Navy. And I'm a volunteer, but basically I want to be a British naval pilot.
And what did you see on board of the Eagle that day? What made you feel in love with the naval aviation?
Well, it had aeroplanes, it had very nice community of the ship, was very pleasant. They were nice people, which made it all the more attractive to be with the British ambiente.
After that experience on board of the Eagle, you ended right back in your life. And you said that your father passed away when you were 10 years old. So you were responsible for taking care of your mother.
She had a brother who had been in World War One, and she had another brother who was bank manager for British Bank. So they tried to help her economically, and she was a good worker. She did what she could. She looked after us.
During the late 1930s, Germany was a rising power in Europe. The Third Reich was a rising power in Europe. There were many, many occasions when politics in Europe were very worrisome for people on the continent and all around the world. How was your view of these events being in Argentina, being a British subject in Argentina? How did you view this?
Well, I was very pleased to be a British subject and not a German one. Even though in 1940 my best friend was an Argentine German who was also very keen on sport, Hans Begemann. He was a good man. So we said, the war is the war. We have no war in Buenos Aires, let's keep it that way. So much so that he played with me on a first division hockey team, men's hockey team, which is called Club Atlético San Isidro, del cual la mayoría eran ingleses o hijos de ingleses. Entonces, como la madre de él se puso un poco exótica con el hitlerismo, lo que pasó ahí es que él se separó de la madre, pero los chicos de hockey dijeron, él no puede jugar en la primera. Entonces me lo tuve que llevar a otro lado y lo llevé al club de gimnasia y esgrima, que también yo era socio, y ahí lo aceptaron. Cuando vuelvo de la guerra, lo voy a ver porque era mi mejor amigo, y dice, a mí me gustaría volver al casting. Entonces le digo, bueno, el sábado chapamos los palos y nos vamos al club. Y los otros lo miraron a él de arriba abajo y yo dije, la guerra terminó, ya no hay más guerra. Hans ha sido socio desde que era infante y yo estoy votando y considero que soy el único que tengo voto. Yo lo llevé afuera, ahora lo traigo de vuelta. Y así quedamos.
I don't think I ever heard you in your previous documentary, or the articles I read about you. I never saw your comment about the event in 1939, which was the Battle of the River Plate, which took place very near Buenos Aires. And in Buenos Aires, there came the crew of the KMS Graf Spee, the big battleship of the German Navy. Were you in Buenos Aires when that happened, and how did you view that?
Well, I was playing rugby in the first division of Buenos Aires Football Club, and in the first salvo by the Graf Spee, they almost sunk the HMS Exeter. Quiere decir que la primera tormentita, el Exeter se iría a fondo. De nuestro club fueron 15 voluntarios del Buenos Aires para recuperar parte de la tripulación del Exeter. Y el Exeter hizo rumbo a las Malvinas, Islas Malvinas, y llegó allá por el deseo del Señor. Cualquier tormentita hubiera ido a pique, y yo no fui porque tenía muchas obligaciones. Últimamente he ido como 5 años corridos a poner las flores, los poppies ingleses, cuando se hace el 11 de noviembre el Legion Day, o si no, el 19 de diciembre, los alemanes festejan la muerte del capitán alemán.
Hans Langsdorff.
Hans Langsdorff, y después vamos a comer en el club alemán. Este año no hay club alemán. Tenía una invitación para ir el domingo, pero cuando llamo, yo también tengo mis limitaciones ahora.
¿Sí?
Soy un 104, pero más o menos.
Yes. I think the first volunteers in wartime departed for Britain in the beginning of 1940. Did you knew some of those volunteers?
Well, I knew them from rugby and cricket. The first one was somebody con antecedentes de Armenia. El primero que fue a la guerra de Buenos Aires fue un armenio británico. Salió con el primer barco. Cuando yo salí fue principios del año 43 y teníamos 400 voluntarios a bordo, 300 y algo argentinos, 70 chilenos y después una docena de uruguayos. Fuimos a Río y hubo una docena de brasileros. En el camino a Inglaterra nos mandaron a la isla de Bermuda con una contraorden porque querían llevar 70 oficiales navales de Yanquilandia a Nueva York. Y nos quedamos un día, perdimos de los 400 voluntarios que habían hecho el viaje. Realmente algo muy interesante, muy happy. Y salimos para Inglaterra y como éramos un barco solo, se dice que había 3 submarinos esperando la salida de un convoy de unos 60 y pico de barcos que salió una semana después. El hecho es que ese convoy perdió como 20 barcos. Fue atacado por submarinos alemanes. Nosotros llegamos a Liverpool sin problema.
The boat that took you to England was a Royal Navy ship or was a civil?
Commercial ship. It was the Highland Brigade, and that was the Royal Mail Line. From here to Rio, Bermuda, Liverpool, all on the Highland Brigade.
When you arrived in Britain, it was the beginning of 1943. And what did you see immediately that had an impact on you?
The thing that convinced me that I was doing the right thing is we arrived in Liverpool in the afternoon and took buses to go to London. And that evening, there was a very bright moon. And we were traveling along high roads, rutas importantes, a donde cada tanto había una iglesia y esa iglesia estaba hecha bolsa y todo alrededor.
It was destroyed, damaged.
It was the damage to the churches. And I thought to myself, Europe has been Christian for 2,000 years almost. Y acá tenemos el primer objeto de tirar abajo son las iglesias. Y ya con eso, ya Hitler, y cuando leo la historia de Hitler en Polonia, ya para mí era el máximo HP.
HP, what does that mean?
Hijo de puta.
How would I say this in English? The foremost son of a bitch.
Foremost son of a bitch.
I understand now. And Ronnie, once you got to London, were you directed to the Royal Navy office? What did they do with you there?
I went to visit an uncle and aunt. He had been a director of Argentine Railway, the Ferrocarril Pacífico, that used to go to Chile. He had 6 sons, and 5 sons joined as volunteers and became army officers. And when I got to the office in London, the girl behind the counter said, "What's your name, sir?" She looked up my archivo, my file, and said, "Scott Ronald David, you're going into the army." And I said, "No, I'm not going into the army. I have an appointment with the Navy. I want to be a naval pilot." And she says, "No, you have to go into the army." And I said, "I'm going into the Navy, and I'm going to the Navy now after this visit." So she said to me, "If you're not back in 48 hours, I have to report you to the police because you're being a contramano." So I said, "You can do whatever you like, but I have papers to show that I have an appointment with the Navy." And in the Navy, basically, when they heard that I played rugby and cricket, first division. Já estava dentro.
They accepted you in no time.
Well, I speak good English. I'm interested in games. I do a lot of games. So
You're very able-bodied, very athletic.
That's right. That is
Yeah.
correct. I should have died 3 weeks ago, but
I don't know what happened.
he didn't.
So, Ronnie, after the Navy accepted you,
Yes.
how did you end up in the pilot training?
Well, because I said I wanted to be a pilot.
Yes.
So they examined me and said, theoretically, I'm in condition to be a pilot. In the First World War, the pilots who went into the Royal Flying Corps, the RAF didn't exist in 1914. If they were from Eton, Harrow, Sherborne, and another school, and they played for the first in cricket or rugby, they went automatically to do pilot training. The French, they measured your pressure and blood and did the usual things. And then to find out whether you were qualified for pilot training, they would sit you down in a chair and you were unaware, but they fired a .45 revolver behind your head, and according to how high you went up in the air, you got to be a pilot, go for pilot training or not.
To see if you're calm with this loud noise.
Más o menos.
You ended up in Canada for flight training.
I was sent. First of all, I had to be a sailor.
Yes.
So we had 3 months of being trained as sailors, and we had exams for recognizing ships, recognizing aeroplanes, Morse code, and a whole lot more, apart from the water part. Well, I passed the exam. I was interested. So I was sent to Scotland, to the Clyde, and I went on the Queen Mary.
Oh, the Queen Mary, the great ghost.
Queen Elizabeth was number one.
Yeah.
70,000 tons.
Yes.
Queen Mary was 63,000 tons. And they took ships, they took American soldiers from New York to North Africa. And I was sent on the Queen Mary without an escort from Scotland, Glasgow, to New York. And we couldn't put our fingers anywhere that the boat wasn't covered with chewing gum.
Chewing gum?
Chewing gum. It had chewing gum all over. Under, over, here, there is chewing gum.
American soldiers chewing gum and then gluing it right
That's
after.
right.
Yeah.
So from New York, we took a train. We went to Canada all the way to Toronto. When we got to Toronto about lunchtime, they took us to a salon that was number one.
The best.
Crystal glasses, silver, knives and spoons, everything very pituco, very special, very number one. Most of the boys had never seen that before.
And Ronnie, in Canada, your main goal was to learn to fly.
To win.
Yes.
Win our wings. And we had the course was 3 sections of 60 hours. The first one, this is a tiger moth.
The Havilland tiger moth.
The Havilland tiger moth. And we had to do 60 hours. But on this plane, you had to win your solo flight. By the time you had 8 hours.
Just 8 hours before your solo.
8 hours instruction. It's just very primitive, very simple. At 8 hours, I had already won my solo flight. And my last flight of the 60 was a triangular flight. I had to make a flight plan from here to number one, to number two, and back to number one. And it was snowing all of
It was.
number three, the last section. So everything was going white. So you didn't know where to get off. We were too young in the flying business. And the plane suddenly went like this, and I looked down and I saw that we were on the edge of Lake Huron. And I realized that there was a factory there on the edge of the lake, which is part of the airdrome. So I didn't get lost in the States because I was heading south.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would have gone on into the States. So,
Invading American airspace.
That's right. So from there, we had a weekend's leave in Toronto, and then we went to a place called Hamilton, and we had to do 2 sections of 60 hours. So the following section was getting onto a plane that was metal, that had all the instruments that the Tiger Moth didn't have. That was the next 60 hours. And the last 60 hours was where we learned to machine gun.
Yeah.
Use machine guns, drop bombs, fly in formation, and do night flights. And you made out a flight plan like before from A to B to C and back to A, in which you flew by instruments. You had a screen, so you just had to fly by instruments. You had made the flight plan, so you had to follow because you couldn't see outside. And when it said that was the last minute, then you were able to raise the thing and hope that you could recognize where you took off from. I was lucky.
But you succeeded at that.
Well, with that and the other, I won my wings there. And then we had 10 days off, so we went Ardedo to New York and back.
You went to see New York. And when was this, Ronnie? This was still 1943 or already 1944?
It was the end of 43.
End of 43. Okay.
Towards the end of 43.
And then, Ronnie, did you fly Spitfires yet still in Canada?
No. Then we went to the East Coast and we took a ship from there back to England. And then first of all, we had to go to a meeting with some captains, and they decided whether we would be officers, sub-lieutenants, or not. And I had been responsible for my course of 32 cadets, and I think we lost 3 who didn't make the exam, and 2 more that were left as non-commissioned officers. And the rest were all sub-lieutenants like myself. From there, we had a few hours flying, and then I went to fly in a Seafire squadron.
Seafire squadron.
That's
But the first aircraft in this squadron that you flew was an actual Seafire or was a Spitfire?
Seafires.
Always
Because-
Seafires.
The Seafire had an additional anchor. It was a Spitfire. If you called it a Seafire, it's because it had an anchor to catch the cable on an aircraft carrier.
And also the wings folded.
And the wings retracted, yes. That's to go downstairs.
Yeah, and the elevator. This is really, really amazing and something very rare today. You flew one of the most iconic aircraft in history, the Spitfire, the Seafire.
That's
So-
right.
Tell me,
And
tell
I-
me.
Finished up flying a Spitfire which is a 5-bladed prop. You see, the latest is 5-bladed, and the engine was not a Merlin. It was a Griffin, 2,300 horsepower.
Yes.
It was a Model 21.
Oh, it was already a Model 21. Very modern.
Because I ended up in the Navy flying any kind of aeroplane. And in operations, I hardly did any operations. I had to do a lot of instruction, yes. I think what happened is that the boys were mostly 17, 18, and I was already 24 to 25.
Yes.
So I became a brother, a big brother, automatically. That's the way it went. So I didn't get onto operations.
When you saw the Seafire the first time and you had the instruction on the Seafire, what was like to sit on the cockpit for the first time? It was small, like many people say.
Well, it's because you didn't have any extra space. You had an American plane like the Thunderbolt. Well, the Thunderbolt was something huge. The Thunderbolt had rows either side. You were in an easy chair like this, and you had a side here, a side there with buttons and switches and everything else. But it was huge because the radial engine was huge. The thing is, a Spitfire was a racing machine. It wasn't a fighter like the Hurricane. Hurricane was designed as a fighter, and the Hurricane flew almost 200 kilometers less than the Spitfire. The Spitfire was so much of a racer that on this leading edge here, they couldn't put in machine guns. They had to put in a caliber, which is just an ordinary rifle, which is
303.
303.
Yes, inside the wings.
Because, well, the thing is, you had to widen or broaden this leading edge, because otherwise the machine guns wouldn't fit in there. So they had to do that.
When you sit in the cockpit of the Spitfire, and then you're
like this. I was like this.
And when you first give power to the engine, it was a big pull, right? It was a lot of power, right, in front of you.
You had to be very sensitive to that power. You couldn't put on lots of power for takeoff. You just put on 38 almost. You use 3/4 power.
In the air, the Spitfire did respond sensitive to your movements. It was a smooth airplane to fly.
3 fingers.
Three
With 3 fingers. You just moved it around.
So it was a pleasant airplane to fly.
It was a very exact plane.
One of the things that pilots say, it was like the most difficult thing, or one of the most dangerous things to do in a Spitfire, was landing, because the landing gear was very narrow, and many pilots were killed during accidents on landing. Did you ever
I had no difficulty.
No difficulty.
Landing. But I'll tell you this, there were more losses due to landing problems than actual fighting operations.
Yes.
In the fleet era, we lost more trouble with the Seafires because of the landings. The thing is that a ship is going like this. So on the way up, and you're high, suddenly the distance between...
You struck the landing strip. You struck the deck at very high speed, right?
That's right. So we had more problems with landing gear, with C5, with landing gear, than in actual operation.
Have you witnessed any of these accidents yourself?
One day, my engine went out, and I had to land my. It was a master's plane. I had to land in the sea.
Wow.
I had no option, and that was when I called up the my tower, and we had girls' wrens in them, and I said, "This is such and such a plane, Mayday, Mayday," and that Mayday meant I was going into the sea. So the girl didn't quite understand my message. So she said, "Is there any pilot who heard him will tell me what he heard?" And somebody said, came out of the air and said, "I think he's bitching about something." And I was talking about ditching.
Ditching.
Ditching means going into the sea,
Yes.
and bitching is puta parió.
Complaining. But Ronnie, did you make a crash land on the water then in the sea?
See?
Yes.
Yes.
And this
No problem.
no problem. You're a great flyer then.
The plane turned around like this. So I found my head near the pedals of the plane. So it took me a little bit longer to get out, but I got out.
You got out and you were rescued. Ronnie, I also saw that you were eyewitness of the V1 attacks on London.
One day I was near Wembley, the Wembley Stadium, and I said, "That sounds like a motorcycle in the sky." And then it was not one, it was 6, 7 V1s, one after the other.
Wow.
And I looked around. I was on a corner on my bicycle, and the woman in the corner said, "Nene, entra en el zaguán, cubrite."
Run.
I didn't have anywhere to go. I watched these 6 V1s go past me.
Was a spooky sound, scary sound.
No, it's the sound of a motorbike.
A motorbike. Yes.
It's like
different
you have
sound.
a motorbike engine. You put that in there, and you calculate, or the Germans calculated so much fuel, so it would drop más o menos in the desired area of London. Then it depended on local winds whether there was a difference or not.
After the war, you kept for a while with the Royal Navy. You were still working with the Royal Navy for some years, right?
No, it wasn't that long because I did communications work for the Royal Navy. And then I arranged that I went in and I went to Manchester to a company called Tootle Broadhurst Lee, which at that time was the company with mostly cotton, but they had guaranteed products. 80% of the products were ladies' clothes, and they were all guaranteed. And eventually, they were the people who came out with the first junior wool socks. They spent 15 million pounds to create wool socks that wouldn't shrink, not to shrink.
And how did you become a civilian pilot for commercial flights?
Well, the thing is, I came out here and with it been on, and Evita's brother, who was he was a real crap. And I saw that it was going to be no expansion or nothing done. I looked around and found Aeroposta and did an adaptation with Aeroposta in Patagonia and started flying in January 1948.
January 1948. And you flew for how many years?
1970.
1970, and then you retired.
30 years.
30 years of flying. Amazing.
30. And I flew DC-3, DC-4, Comet 4. Then came
707.
the 707, I think it was. I used to fly international, and I didn't like the idea of flying 10, 12 laps, hour laps.
Yes.
It was a real porqueria. So, and the other thing, flying Kawasaki, you flew 2 hours, but you were flying all day. And the Boeing 737 was a really nice plane
For regional
DC-3
flights.
for regional flights.
You're now at 104 years old, and I know that you're still biking, cycling around, you still play ball. So
That's
tell us,
right.
Ronnie, what's the secret to reach 104 years old being that good?
I think the secret, which I'm not using now, is a glass of red wine at lunchtime.
A glass of red wine. Now, many doctors recommend that.
Because that's the way I feel about it. I feel that I've been with doctors who everyone has his own pill, and I feel that that has put me a little bit offside. Yesterday, with my son, I went all around the block.
All around the block.
That's right. Apparently, I should have passed away 3 weeks ago. Si Dios lo quiere, bueno, seguiremos.
If it's the will of God, right? What you're going to do about it, just live on.
That's right.
Ronnie Scott, thank you a lot for talking to us. Thank you a lot for being here. It was a really good experience. Thank you for all your comments, Ronnie. So I let you now to send a message to everyone that's listening to you.
Well, you can tell them this. We need to have people respect each other. One should respect oneself and respect the other.
Yes.
And we need that badly. And the other thing we need is that the young people should have education. And if we can give them sport as well, that at least.
Ronnie, once more, thank you for being with us. Congratulations for this amazing life you have. And I wish to thank to Flavia Santini, which is right there with Ronnie right now, and her father, Roman Santini, my friend from São Paulo, living in São Paulo, which got this appointment with Ronnie today. So I wish to thank you all for watching us until now, and we see you next time. E aí, gostou do nosso conteúdo? Se você quer que a Sala de Guerra continue produzindo esses vídeos, considere colaborar conosco. Você pode nos ajudar mandando um Pix pra gente ou então na nossa campanha lá no Apoia-se, onde você vai ter acesso ao nosso grupo exclusivo do WhatsApp e ter seu nome exibido aqui nos vídeos. O link tá bem aqui na descrição. Bom, se você gostou desse vídeo, não esquece de compartilhar ele com seus amigos, também dá um joinha pra gente e se inscreve aí na Sala de Guerra para não perder mais nada. Eu vou ficando por aqui, agradeço novamente a sua audiência e aquele abraço da Sala de Guerra.